Good day to all of you. Today we will consider Mathew Arnold as a literary critic. Mathew Arnold is the first critic who produced a scientific conception of reading. Arnold initiated the formal criticism in poetry. He was the most influential of the Victorian critics and has been characterized by David Daishes as the great modern critic. Arnold deplored and found unacceptable the lack of firm authority and centrality of excellence in the literature of their age, and within their criticism, each has sought to establish critical standards which would be independent of time and space. He fought against the romantic theory of criticism with its emphasis on the mind of the poet and the psychological patterns which prevail in the given work, and stressed the need to see the aesthetic object as a thing independent of the mind of its creator. Arnold influenced not only T.S. Eliot but a number of other 20th century critics, among whom Irving Babbitt, Paul Elmer More, F.R. Lewis, and Lyon Trilling stand out. The Victorians provided the last major step in the advancement of English critical theory before its 20th century establishment as a scientific and methodological discourse. It is also true to assume that Victorian criticism represents the transition to or culminates in modern literary theory and criticism. In the 19th century, the coexistence of different artistic and literary trends during one period leads to the separation of criticism from the literary process. The separation of criticism from literary practice is also a result of the diversity of literary forms. But primarily, the independence of criticism from literature is acquired by creative and critical writing, confronting and falling under the influence of diversity and complexity of philosophical thought, social theories, and scientific advances, where critics attempt to assimilate science to literary criticism. The diversification of the critical systems in the Victorian age is the result of the massive presence of different critical voices belonging to both professional critics like John Ruskin and writer critics like Walter Pater, Mathew Arnold, and Henry James. Among others, they are critics focusing on art and literature, as well as metacritics providing critical commentary on criticism. The literature of the Victorian age entered a new period after the Romantic Revival, and The literature of this era was preceded by Romanticism and was followed by Modernism or Realism. Hence, it can also be called a fusion of romantic and realistic style of writing. Though the Victorian age produced two great poets, Alfred Lord Tennyson and Robert Browning, the age is also remarkable for the excellence of his prose. However, the contribution of Mathew Arnold should not be forgotten. He has actually been called the forgotten Victorian, and it is certainly true that his poetry is much less read than that of his two contemporaries. Arnold, of course, wrote very little poetry and he turned more and more to prose, and his increasing fame as a critic of literature and of society soon drove his poetic achievement into the background, so that to modern readers he is familiar, if at all, only through a few standard anthology pieces such as Dover Beach and The Scholar Gypsy. We'll continue the next time.